Coming to you from Rochester, Minnesota, our town. Well, we're checking in with the Rochester Civic Theatre and what they're up to this summer, and we are sitting here, or Zooming here, with Misha Johnson, the Interim Director of the Rochester Civic Theatre. Welcome to our town.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, word on the street is that the Civic Theatre is going to be opening up again. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We are luckily opening up on July 23rd, thanks to Governor Walz, and they're letting theaters reopen at 25%. So Romeo and Juliet never got a chance to have its opening night back in March. They were shut down right before the outbreak hit. So we're bringing the cast back and restaging them here on July 23rd.
Okay, wonderful. I know a lot of people are thinking about this. What are you doing to ensure that audiences and your performers that are coming back are going to be able to participate in all these shows in a safe way?
Yeah, absolutely. And safety is a number one concern, obviously, for patrons as well as our actors that are on the stage. And luckily, Shakespeare wrote this during the plague. And so...
How apropos.
Yes. And, obviously this wouldn't work with all performances and all shows. It certainly wouldn't work for big musicals. But Romeo and Juliet, one of the lines actually is a plague on both your houses. And there's a lot of conversations about the plague and illness and things like that within the script itself. So we are just using that to our creative advantage. And all of the actors will be wearing masks. So, so our costumer, Kelly Kirkpatrick, actually has designed plague masks for each of the characters to go with the costumes. So they will be wearing those masks on stage and we'll be miking the actors. So that's how we're keeping the actors safe. All patrons will be required to wear masks, of course, because that is a city ordinance here in Rochester, Minnesota. So you will have to wear your mask. There's only 75 people that will be in the house, and that's our 25% capacity. We'll spray you with some hand sanitizer, take your temperature, and then seat you 6 feet apart from the other patrons in your party.
Wonderful. I know some of your patrons have had season tickets and things like that. Are those still valid to be used for this and future shows?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Everything is still valid. If you have season tickets, please call us. We'll get you rescheduled. It's pretty amazing. The box office personnel, her name is Steph Stafford, and she is devised a system that is all by hand. It's all old school. So you're having to sit 6 feet apart. So you got to call her and make sure that safety is your number one priority. So if you buy tickets online, it is general admission, but then we will schedule you with an actual seat to make sure your safety is number one priority.
The Civic Theatre has, as you know, obviously has had a roughy couple of years, and certainly at the beginning of this year had some not so great news that was shared with the community. And so what are some specific steps that the theater is taking to improve stability, financial stability, just stability generally, transparency, engaging community once again?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the people who are here now and are sitting on the board were a part of that movement that were also upset, and had some frustrations with the Civic Theatre's administration beforehand. And so it's really amazing what the board did is that they have they've let on 4 new board members and then hired me on. So the biggest difference is that there's not a full-time staff here. I am the only full-time staff person. So developing a sustainable model really is the key moving forward, and returning it back to a community theater. That's the number one thing, and focusing on local talent. We have so much local talent with actors and designers and directors, and it's really a huge talent pool that we are just going to re-engage. So we did do that as soon as I was brought on. We had a community open house night to re-engage the volunteers. And we'll continue to do events like that because really we want the community, this is the community's theater, and that's the most important thing that we need to keep emphasizing.
And you are the interim director, so are there currently plans to have a search for a more permanent executive director?
Yeah, I believe the board will do that eventually. I think the key element here is to return it back to a sustainable model. So first steps is we don't have 7 full-time staff here anymore, and we certainly are not hiring outside professional actors anymore either. So that will help with that sustainable model and getting that down. So that's the first step, is really just to make it a sustainable model, and then they can go on to hire someone permanently.
Sure. And yeah, just staying nimble and responsive. It's some uncertain times generally, so it's a good approach.
for everyone right now, right?
For sure. So I did want to ask you, as an arts head myself, I was just listening to a recent interview with Lin-Manuel Miranda on NPR, and he said that humans will always gather around the fire and listen to stories. And I wanted to hear your thoughts about what you see as the role of theater during a time of plague, as you mentioned earlier, a time of social unrest, and just the times we're living in.
Yeah, it is. Everyone has said, there's articles out there floating around, saying, oh, the theaters are doomed, and, arts are doomed forever. And sure, financially, it's challenging for every single artist in America, in the world right now, right, to maintain that financially, right? But the truth is that humans are innately creative, right? And humans need that expression. They absolutely need that exercise of their imaginations. They've been doing it ever since, hieroglyphics, and all the way now to Zoom plays. So here we are, and it's those people who are creative are being forced to be even more creative. So I have no doubt that creativity and what's going to come out of this at the end of this pandemic, I think we're going to see some really amazing art spring up out of this. And I'm seeing people, my colleagues all over the country, are doing some incredible work and some incredible artistry due to this pandemic. They're being forced to be creative.
Wonderful. Well, that's a hopeful note to end on. Thank you so much, Misha, and we hope to be able to catch a show in the future.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Our Town is brought to you in part by the following amazing people and organizations:
the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota,
and the members of KSMQ Public Television. Thank you.
Be sure to stick around. We've got more great stories coming your way next. We check in with Chester Woods Park to see how they've been doing as they've recently reopened after the COVID-19 pandemic. And we get some updates on restorative justice in the local community. But up first, we look at our history of women's suffrage here in Rochester, Minnesota, in this week's Our Culture segment.
Rochester had an incredible team of women who were fighting for the right to vote. You got to remember that Rochester at this time was a small town. It was what, 10,000 people? It wasn't a huge city like DC. My name is Wayne Ganaway. I'm the Executive Director of the History Center of Olmsted County, and welcome to our exhibit, The Onward March of Suffrage. Sort of a milestone, if you will, was when a local newspaper publisher, who was a Republican at the time, created this newspaper, and he was very sympathetic to the issue of women's suffrage. And Sarah Berger Stearns had recently arrived in Rochester, and she was pretty outspoken about the right to vote. And she started writing articles in that newspaper and became a voice of suffrage in Rochester. The challenge was for them was that at the same time, most of the Republican-controlled legislature was focused on giving Black men the right to vote, because of course, no Black people had the right to vote at that time. The legislature decided to support Black men voting and to put off the women's right to vote, which really, on a national and state level, caused a schism in the what was before that a unified struggle between Black activists and women. They wanted their fellow women to be really smart about not just the philosophies of voting, but the nuts and bolts of it. So they actually built these mock voting booths where women could go and practice how to vote, right? We actually did some reproductions built to the exact same specifications of those voting booths. And so now visitors can come into those voting booths and experience that same sense of practicing democracy. They can also experience, at least in some way, the consequences sometimes of these women protesting. Some women in Washington, D.C. Protested vigorously. They were thrown into jail, and the jailers were really sadistic. So we have a mock-up of a jail that one of the suffragists was pictured in, and you can go into the jail and get your picture taken in there. You can get a selfie taken with life-sized cutouts, I guess you will, of some of these women as well. So lots of things to do here. And as always, we are very diligent about cleaning the spaces. Everybody wears face masks, staff, visitors, volunteers. And there's lots of elbow room here in the museum. So lots of room to move around and socially distance. Our exhibit is really the thing that we are hoisting our flag on. This is our proud display of being alive and well as a museum in Rochester.
For more information about this story and other Our Town features, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter at KSMQ #OurTown, or ksmq.org/OurTown.
Couldn't love until you stayed. Your pretty laughed, your fashion.
So following the proposed Actions for Justice virtual town hall that happened on June 11th, Rochester Police Department has announced the creation of a new accountability dashboard. The additional dashboard was launched on July 10th, 2020, and will continue to be updated. The dashboard provides data including the number of calls for service and enforcement action, use of force data, vehicle pursuits, trainings, and policies. Community members proposed the dashboard initiative, and RPD committed to the creation within the next 30 days. RPD has stated that this dashboard is intended to address the most pressing areas of concern for the community. So if you'd like to give any suggestions, comments, or feedback on the dashboard, you can reach out to Sandra Ewing, the Professional Standards Manager, at 507-328-6988. The City of Rochester Public Works Department has developed an interactive application that is intended to inform the public of major impacts to things like roads, pedestrian facilities, and parking. The current version focuses on city projects happening in the downtown area. Projects actively under construction are visible by default, while completed and future projects will be switched on by the user. The next version of the application, expected to be completed by the end of July, will add active private construction projects in the downtown area with significant travel impacts to the map. For projects outside of the downtown area, those with significant travel impacts will also be added as time allows. If detours exist, those are also identified on the map. For more information, check out the press release on rochestermn.gov. Up next, we check out what's going on at Chesterwoods Park in ways that you can safely enjoy the great outdoors this summer in this week's Walkabout segment.
This is Danielle Teal with Our Town Walkabout. I am at Chesterwoods with Celeste Lewis. She's a naturalist, and we're going to talk about what Chesterwoods has to offer.
Chesterwoods is 1,330 acres. We have about 15 miles of hiking trails. We do have about 7 miles of equine trails. The reservoir here is about 112 acres at its normal pool. So we offer, during a normal year, we offer watercraft rentals, so paddleboards, kayaks, canoe rental, paddle boat rental. We have a beach, a swimming beach, a public swimming beach, camping. We have picnicking, 7 different picnic shelters. So we have quite a bit to offer here at the park. The park has been absolutely crazy. In fact, especially when everything was kind of shut down, it's so busy out here, but it was busy in a good way. It was mom, dad, and kids out hiking, enjoying what they're supposed to be enjoying again. You know, camping, our campground is full all the time.
What are some of the biggest draws here? What are people really, really loving?
Well, the lake is probably our biggest draw. The lake and camping, I'm going to be honest, are probably our two biggest draws. So this summer it has for sure been fishing, has been just huge. It's just exploded this summer, but fishing is always a big one. Kayaking is a great reservoir to kayak on. The lake is trolling motors only, so no gas motors, so it's nice and serene for kayaking and canoeing.
This is Danielle Teal with Our Town Walkabout. It was so much fun talking to Celeste about Chester Woods and what it has to offer. I'm going to go jump in the water and cool off.
The last season we had the pleasure of welcoming Kendall and his colleague to give us a little bit of a primer on restorative justice, and I'm really happy to welcome you back again, Kendall, to talk about Three Rivers Restorative Justice, which is now a local effort. And to get us started, can you just give us a basic idea, what the basic idea behind restorative justice is, just as a reminder?
Just imagine if your child did something destructive, would you find it more effective to give them some harsh, long-lasting punishment, or to show them the consequences of their behavior and help them to restore that? And that's really what restorative justice is about. It makes a safe and productive way to have a conversation between a person who has caused harm and the person who was harmed in the community, so that that person who was harmed can express the consequences of the harm in their lives, and the person who caused the harm can take ownership, can take responsibility, and find a way to restore the relationship, to make amends. And key through the whole thing is that everyone involved is treated with respect.
So that sounds, as a parent, that sounds great, certainly, and as a community member. But some do see restorative justice as being, quote unquote, soft on those who cause the harm. So in what ways is Three Rivers Restorative Justice working to ensure that the victims' voices and the voices of their families are heard in this process?
Well, the very mission of Three Rivers Restorative Justice is to bring together those who have been harmed, so that the first people that we mention in our mission is those who have been harmed, the victims, and then those who have caused harm, and the community and family members, to create a space for dialogue and transformative resolutions. And our number one goal is that those who have been harmed will be empowered with a voice and with opportunities for healing, that they will be heard. I can just give you a quick vignette of a case I was part of in the cities. It was an elderly gentleman who he was a widower, and his house had been burglarized. And the thing that just tore him up was that his deceased wife's wedding ring was stolen. When they brought in the young man who had committed the burglary, and there was a conversation between them, and this young man came to realize how much that meant to the man who had owned the ring, or whose wife had passed away. He went and he got that ring and returned it back to him and made that reparation. And they got to know each other in that conversation. And instead of this elderly man just looking at someone as like a monster who had burglarized his home, he knew the young man who had done it, and the young man knew the person who had caused harm. And there was a change for both of them. And the person burglarized felt great satisfaction out of that, versus how our traditional system would have done it, where he may never have gotten that ring back, and the young man might have ended up in jail or prison.
All right, that's a wonderful example. Are there times, I'm sure, where that doesn't work, where those reparations aren't made? How do you deal with that?
Well, it's not always necessary to have, for example, the person harmed. And sometimes the person harmed would not feel safe or would not want to sit down with the person who caused the harm. And in those cases, we use what we call surrogate victims, someone else who has experienced a similar type of a crime and maybe is in a different place in their journey, and they're willing to sit down. I've seen that happen many times when I was a chaplain in the federal prison system. We had a lot of violent offenders in there who would never be allowed in the system to sit down maybe with the person that they harmed or their family. But we'd bring in other people who had suffered violent crimes. And when they had that conversation, I saw the people who had been harmed finding some healing and some hope that this is tragedy that happened to them. They were able to express how their family was devastated by that violent crime, say a child who had been killed or a carjacking. They were told that story. And these men who were listening, who are violent criminals, many of whom had never expressed remorse for the things they had done, I saw tears in their eyes. And I saw them get up and say, you know, you weren't my direct victim, but I want to apologize to you for what happened to you. And I never want to do this to anyone again. And I happen to know some of those men now years later after their prison sentences, and they are transformed. And some of them have told me, they said, Chaplain, I can remember when I turned around, it was when I heard the story of the victims. And I never want to be that kind of person again.
So it is some really important work that you're continuing to do now in the community through TRJ, and I'm wondering how have you been engaging stakeholders, and who have you been working with locally as you've been rolling out this program here?
Well, we were very blessed in this community to have a number of stakeholders who are very excited about restorative justice. The chief public defender, she actually has conducted a number of restorative justice conferences herself, and she said we need something like this here. The county attorney, Mark Ostrom, is open to this happening. We've had a couple of hours of conversations with him. Also, we've been in conversation with victim services, and they see the need for this. Some of them are experienced in working in restorative justice and would like to have partners from the community to help bring in the victims. Also, community corrections is involved. And so all of these, and there's a group called the Juvenile Justice Committee for Dodge, Fillmore, and Olmsted County. And they represent all the different branches, the police and the sheriff and others who would be involved in any kind of a juvenile offense. And we've had conversation with them, and that's ongoing on how they will give us cases to handle.
And how can community members get involved in the work that you're doing? Do you have any upcoming events or trainings that you want to share?
Well, thank you for asking that, Nicole. We have a website. It's trrj.org. And on that website, you can go and you can sign up for September training. And we do need people who feel like they might be able to help in this area to come to a training. It's September 9th through the 11th. So it'll be a 2.5-day training. And online there, you can get signed up for that.
Wonderful. And what can facilitators expect to learn from that training, just kind of high level? What could they expect?
Sure. Well, they'll learn basic communication skills for helping both the offending and victimized people to have safe, constructive conversations to be able to make things right again. They're going to be learning a technique that's called victim offender conferencing. And there's various restorative justice ways, others called circles, but we'll be using victim offender conferencing. And they're going to learn mediation techniques and be trained to meet individually first with the person who's caused harm, and then individually with the person who was harmed, and listen to them and have the criteria to determine, is it wise to try to do a victim offender conference in this situation? We don't want to enter into one unless we're almost certain that there's going to be a positive outcome. And so they're going to learn the skills to determine that. And then they're going to learn the skills to co-facilitate. You don't ever facilitate one alone, you co-facilitate, and to use good mediation to get people out of their heads and out of their anger and into their hearts, and to really build empathy with each other. And then to develop a plan. You'll get the skills to help them put together a plan, and that can be reviewed and be sure that there's compliance, so that there is a transformation that can happen out of this conflict or this harm that's caused.
Well, as we're wrapping up here, you're working a lot with the criminal justice system. You mentioned partnerships with law enforcement, and we're living through a time of renewed struggles for Black lives and a call for deep racial healing across our country, and tensions between communities and the justice system. So I was just wondering your thoughts about what you see as the role of restorative justice practices and approaches in this current movement.
Sure. Well, Minnesota, unfortunately, incarcerates people of color proportionally to the population at a rate of 10-to-1 compared to whites. So our current punitive justice system is wreaking havoc in some community of color and leaving children without their mothers and fathers, children who are then much more vulnerable. If your parent gets involved in the justice system in a negative way, you're 5 times as likely to also become involved and have negative interactions with law enforcement. So restorative justice, instead of ripping parents away from their families by incarcerating them, finds ways for there to be healing and for parents to be able to still be with their families. It decreases the use of incarceration.
Kendall, we're wrapping up here, so thank you so much for sharing with us, and we'll be looking out for more news from the organization. Take care.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you for joining us on Our Town, the show about Rochester. We will see you next week.
I can't say